All right, now just dividing this up a little bit and starting to talk more about our food preservations and organisms that can cause foodborne illnesses. So just kind of, again, past, present, and future here whenever we look at preserving foods. Salts and sugar are commonly added to foods. This reduces the water that bacteria and microorganisms have, so it makes it harder for them to survive and reproduce. Smoking, so smoking meat, of course, is still common today more for a flavor aspect, but it's a way of preserving so that heat kills the microbes. And also there are some chemicals in that smoke that are preservatives to prevent prevent those microorganisms from growing. And then also the water evaporating dries it out and reduces the amount of water for the microorganisms. The process of fermentation, so different bacteria and yeast make acids, and alcohol is they're getting and using energy. And then that can minimize the growth of other bacteria and yeast. So using good bacteria to prevent the harmful ones. And then the drying, so like dried fruits and dried meats, again, it evaporates the water, so less water is available for those microorganisms to survive. I'm just kind of looking, again, a little bit more at fermentation and our magnificent microbiome here. Again, fermentation can also result from those probiotics. So some examples here, kefir and yogurt, they deliver the most beneficial bacteria. Again, bacteria are added to those. It helps kind of as a preservative because they go through fermentation, keeps food spoiling, microorganisms from growing. So again, those are also linked to reducing inflammation and improving gut health. Also a lot of cheeses, sauerkrauts, and those even some pickles have a lot of live probiotics in them. Also some are added to sourdough bread, and canned fermented vegetables, though, are destroyed then by the heat treatment. So again, the fermentation takes place, and then the other organisms can be killed during heating, though. All right, looking at some other preservations. So again, we mentioned pasteurization. In case you're not familiar, that's moderately high temperatures used for about 15 to 30 seconds, but essentially inactivates enzymes and kills microorganisms in the milk without it being too hot that it like curdles the milk and makes the milk not usable. Refrigeration and kind of the opposite effect on the temperature, so decreasing temperatures that make it again hard for microorganisms to be able to reproduce. It doesn't necessarily kill them, kills them, does not kill them, it just slows them down. And then just more extreme temperature decline, of course, in freezing, and again, just stops the growth. The microorganisms can't grow and divide in those colder conditions. Their enzymes won't allow it. And then also using canning, in which food is heated in the containers to destroy the microorganisms, and then those foods can be left at room temperature. And then there are some chemical preservatives that are used, and we hear a lot about this kind of in ads and in the news about the effects, especially long-term effects of different preservatives. So these are chemicals that are used, and they're typically combined and used in synergistic activity, so adding a couple of them to cause a greater effect. So they've been used for centuries, because that a chemical preservative would include salt, because it's a chemical, sugars, acids, but other chemicals include things we may not be as familiar with, like formic acid, sulfur dioxide, benzoic acids. But again, their idea is preventing microbes from growing. And then the last one here I'm talking about is irradiation, so actually using radiation energy to pass through the food, and that would kill living things like insects, bacteria, and fungi. Again, that radiation isn't passed on to us, it's just sent through the food in order to hinder those microbes. Now, as that is used, there is a symbol that's shown here. So again, that does not make the food radioactive, but it still is labeled as being irradiated to increase transparency. But again, the energy passes through the food. There isn't any, you can't have a residue of radioactivity like you can of different chemicals. So the FDA approved for use in eggs, just to give you an idea of with foods that are irradiated. So eggs, different seeds, some meats and spices, dried seasonings, and then also some fresh fruits and vegetables are also irradiated to improve their shelf life. But again, this specific symbol here, the Radura symbol, is required for that transparency. A few others here, so just some of the techniques that can be used. So sterilization, so sometimes the food and the package is actually sterilized, meaning it's completely devoid of microorganisms. So again, both the food and the package before the food goes in. So things like the creamers that are set out, they are sterilized so that, again, they don't spoil because there's not a microbe in there to spoil. And then there's also an ultra high temperature processing that, as the name implies, just uses really high temperatures, but for a very quick amount of time. All right, so just a little bit about the different organisms that can cause foodborne illnesses. So starting with bacteria, they can cause illness in 3 different ways. So first of all, an infection. And that just means that you directly consume the bacteria by the food, and then it's now growing in your intestinal tract. Other times it's toxin mediated, to where those bacteria produce a harmful toxin as they colonize the tract. So again, it's more the toxin that is harmful than necessarily the growing of the bacteria. And then foodborne intoxication, this is where the bacteria secrete the toxin in the food, and the toxin harms the humans after being ingested. So they're not actually exposed to the bacteria. They don't have an infection of bacteria at the same time or at that time, but they have been exposed to the toxin, which causes that illness. And this is just kind of an idea, again, putting things into perspective about temperatures and microbes. So the reason high temperatures are used, all living things have a maximum temperature to which they no longer can withstand. And so that is extremely high to kill what are referred to as spores, which are kind of a dormant state of some bacteria. But up 121 degrees Celsius or 250 degrees Fahrenheit is needed for that. Again, kind of the danger zone here, anywhere between like 60, even up to 125, even a little bit above refrigeration. So between 40 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit is the danger zone. Bacteria love that temperature, so they can start growing very quickly and multiplying, and can lead to those foodborne illnesses. Again, it starts decreasing as the temperature goes down or up, but this danger zone between 40 and 125 degrees Fahrenheit. So just specifically looking at a few different types of bacterial infections. So Clostridium botulinum. So if you've ever heard of Botox, this is the same organism. It produces a toxin from this organism. That's why it's called Botox. But this is also a toxin that can come, especially in improperly canned foods, especially like home canning. It can also be seen, though, in fermented fishes and improperly stored baked potatoes. And then just, again, most of these foodborne illnesses kind of all look the same as far as vomiting, diarrhea, GI discomfort. And in this case, it, again, kind of variable, but can last days to weeks. Another one we hear a lot about is E. coli. There are specific strains, not all strains of E. coli, but some strains are known to cause foodborne illnesses. And this is from undercooked beef. So again, individuals who like rare meats are more likely to be exposed. Unpasteurized milks and juices, raw fruits and vegetables, can be exposed to this. It's more from fecal contamination during the growing process, and then also contaminated water. So then Listeria is another one. This is from unpasteurized milk, but also soft cheeses that's made from those, but then also where it's really indicated as ready to eat deli meats. So because of this, during pregnancy, women are indicated not to consume these types of foods because of the possible exposure, and exposure can either lead to preterm delivery or stillbirth because the infection does cross over to the fetus. Salmonella, another one we hear a lot about, especially with like chicken and eggs. So eggs, poultries, and meats. Also, again, those unpasteurized milks and juices or cheeses. And then again, those contaminated fruits and vegetables. Staph aureus is our last one here that we'll focus on. This one mainly comes from unrefrigerated or improperly refrigerated meats, potatoes, egg salads, or like cream pastries, things that have like mayo and that type of thing in them, is where you can commonly find this. Switching over now to our viruses. So viruses actually are not considered living because they don't have a cell. They have to enter a cell to reproduce. So they can't reproduce on their own. But as far as those with the that cause foodborne illnesses, they invade the body cells, especially on the gut intestinal cells. And it's really hard to treat viral infections because there are so few targets, because they use our cells to reproduce. So we can't kill them without kind of harming ourselves. It's also not very easy to test for them. Now, the number one pathogen that's contributing to these foodborne illnesses is actually norovirus. So it's a virus rather than a bacteria. Quick onset, about 90% or more have of diarrheal outbreaks on a cruise ship are due to this norovirus. They're hardy, they're hard to get rid of, so they survive freezing, relatively high temperatures, and chlorination. So some of the common ways of getting rid of these microbes. And they can also cause illnesses in long-term care facilities as well. So kind of cruise ships, nursing homes, long-term care facilities are especially prone to these. So just a little bit about it. Again, it's caused by what's called a human rotavirus. Just shows an example down here of raw produce, so like the oyster that's here, also the contaminated drinking water, or some different uncooked foods, or those that were not reheated properly, as well as some shellfish, again, like the oysters that are shown here that were grown in the contaminated waters. So just kind of giving you an idea, here about 64% of outbreaks of the norovirus are from restaurants. Then that's followed by the catering and banquet facilities, private residents, and then some healthcare and schools facilities, and then just kind of a little other category as well. Now our another microbe here, protozoans and helminths. So these are living and organisms, so they live in or on other organisms, so they have a host as well. So humans are usually the host, and they're robbed of nutrients, sometimes even their lives, as these organisms grow. So they're hardest hit in the tropical countries, so not as prominent in the Americas, and that's due to kind of poor sanitation. There are about 80 different parasites known to affect humans. Just to hit on a couple here, Cryptosporidium and Cyclospora are couple common protozoas. Then tapeworm, also like ringworm, tapeworm. Roundworm is another one. So these are kind of the worms are called helminths. And these can spread from person to person as well as in the contaminated food, water, or soil. Now kind of focusing on some things that we add to food. So these food additives just by definition, any substance that's added to food, either directly or indirectly, either one is regulated by the FDA. So some direct additives, again, intentionally added to food, there are about 4,000 different additives out there. The indirect or incidentally added is contamination, again, so like pesticide or antibiotic residues. And there are about 3,000 of those that are monitored for by the FDA. And then just kind of a little aside down here. So sugar is another additive. So something added to food, of course, direct because it's intentional. Salt, corn syrup, citric acid. Those four make up about 98% of the most common additives in the food processing that are being monitored. So why are these being used? So mainly they're used to reduce the food spoilage. So again, the salt and the sugar, they prevent undesirable changes in color. So like especially fruits, if you cut them, then they start turning brown. So these different additives can prevent that. It increases safety whenever the food's moving from one place to another and the temperature is changing. Reduces the enzyme activity that can change the flavor and the color of food. And a lot of them are preservatives that extend that shelf life. So again, like the sugar and the salt that removes the water available for those microbes. So now there's also what's referred to as the USDA Food Safety Program. So it's simplified the rules kind of the foodborne illness prevention. So there are kind of four main actions that you're asked to take. So first of all, clean. So wash your hands, of course, but also surfaces, thinking about, again, working with raw meats and cutting up your chicken. So making sure to clean areas effectively, separate and don't cross-contaminate. So if you're using a cutting board, you wouldn't want to like chop up your chicken and then put your vegetables on it. So again, cleaning in between and separating foods, making sure to cook for the proper temperatures, especially with meats, using a meat thermometer is recommended. And then make sure to chill everything promptly and at the right temperatures. So then purchasing food, some things to kind of pay attention to. So buying, if you're in the grocery store, make sure you get your frozen and perishable stuff last. So even if they're like at the beginning, every store is kind of laid out differently. But make sure anything that needs to be refrigerated, you're putting that in your cart last, so it's not hanging out in your cart the whole time you're shopping. Put meats in a separate plastic bag. Most stores provide those so that you can put like your hamburger and chicken, put it in those little plastic bags just in case it kind of oozes out and contaminates your other foods. Don't buy anything that has any kind of damage, so like dented, any containers. Make sure all the milks and cheeses, all the dairy's pasteurized, and only buy enough produce to last for a week. So that's not something that's going to last very long. So don't try to stock up because then it just increases the chances of, again, molds growing, and you can't always see. Of course, we know when some things are rotten, but at the beginning stages, there wouldn't be enough that you would know it was rotten, but enough that would make you sick. And so again, paying attention to the produce, if it's slimy or kind of brownish or even dried out, indicates it's been there for a while, getting contaminated. And then just observe the sell-by and the expiration dates and pay attention to food recalls. Now, when you're preparing foods, again, washing your hands is so important to prevent cross-contamination and just exposure, anything on your hands going to your mouth. Again, cleaning those counters, cutting boards, equipment efficiently, preparing the raw meats separately from raw vegetables. Again, the cutting board example, don't follow the 5-second rule. So if you drop something on the floor, just throw it away. Thawing foods is an important one too. So instead of just leaving them out on the counter, you want to refrigerate them or cold water or a microwave to thaw foods so that they don't start growing microbes on the part that's thawing while the inside's still, frozen. So it just lets those microbes grow in the process. And then just, try to avoid coughing and sneezing. So cough or sneeze into your elbow. not over top of your food. Then whenever you're cooking your food, just being sure to, again, follow the proper guidelines, make sure you're cooking everything at the right temperature so you can always look. Google's great for that. It has all kinds of tables and charts. Again, using a thermometer just to be more efficient or to be more precise. Cooking sprouts until steaming. Cook stuffing separately. So instead of actually stuffing your turkey, where the turkey can contaminate that stuffing, it is best to separate them. Consume food right away. Don't leave it setting out. Store leftovers quickly. Served cooked meat on clean plates. And then for the outdoor cooking, again, making sure to cook food completely at the site instead of transferring it or kind of partial cooking it in advance and then finishing it up when you get there. And then finally, just storing and reheating foods. So keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold so that they're not going in between and fluctuating. Again, reheat leftovers thoroughly, even if it, you don't want it real hot. Again, those temperatures are needed to kill anything that's kind of started to grow in the meantime. Store peeled and cut up produce in the refrigerator. Keep leftovers in the fridge only for the recommended length. So things shouldn't be in there for weeks. Keep the refrigerator under 40 degrees, so make sure it has a good thermometer with it and check that. And then during any power outages, make sure you keep the refrigerator and the freezer doors closed to keep that temperature below safety levels.